The name of the agency is the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, and our charge is to define and implement projects that'll help restore and certainly protect our coast. Since 1930, we've lost 1,900 square miles of land across the coast. And you hear the cliche that we lose a football field every hour. Well, we've kind of improved that a little bit. We're losing a football field every 100 minutes, which is still a bad situation. And so our land loss situation is very serious. And as we speak, the land you lose normally protects other land and other marsh. And so the more you lose, the more it sort of accelerates. So it's kind of like eating an oyster. It gets bigger. It's good to be here today. I always enjoy the opportunity to be able to talk to people about the coast and the situation we're in. And I really, coming from Grand Isle, I really love this job because, like Chuck said, I can relate somewhat, right? But this job, when I think about it, it's exciting, it's challenging, it's serious. But sometimes I go to bed at night, many times I go to bed at night, and it's very, very daunting. And I want to share with you today, I want to give you a perspective here in the next 20 to 25 minutes on a few things. One, a perspective of the problem. What is the problem? What is the crisis? Two, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing about it. Three, I want to talk about our money. You hear a lot about the money we have. It's overflowing, right? Well, that's not exactly the case. Then I want to talk about some of the hurdles and issues we have getting the problem fixed and addressed. And then I want to talk a little bit about the optimism I think we should have and do have, and the excitement we have about fixing the coast. 52 years ago, this is a picture of Leeville that Chuck was just talking about. 52 years ago, I stood on that bridge looking out across the landscape towards the Gulf of Mexico. Believe me, there wasn't nearly as much water back then, and I was 16 years old at the time, so that's, again, 52 years ago. It wasn't as much water as you see here today. It was almost all land. All you could see was really Bayou Lafourche under that bridge, and the reason I was standing on the bridge was just getting back from evacuation after Hurricane Betsy. And you had to walk. You had to stand on top of the bridge. You had to walk to Grand Isle because LA1 was gone in certain places, and it took us about 12 hours to walk from there to finally get to Grand Isle, and only a certain number of us could get there. So as I rationalized and looked across there, I started to see. I said, started to realize that my life, our coast was changing big time, and I started thinking about what are we going to do about it? Can anybody do anything about it? Who can stop Mother Nature, and who can stop this progression of degradation? So, to me, this, like Chuck says, this picture hits home because it brings back a lot of memories. When I got to the island, I finally found the street I lived on, but I couldn't find a house. So, you have changing moments in your life, defining moments in your life. That was one of them for me. Really defined me as a person. So indeed, we do have a crisis on the coast. In April of this year, the governor signed a declaration stating that we are indeed a state of emergency. Ladies and gentlemen, we're losing 1,900, or we've lost 1,900 square miles of, I can't press on this, it's about to fall on. Square miles of land, our marsh, since the 1930s. And you can see there in red that marsh, that land that has been lost. How big is 1,900 square miles? Well, if you want to compare it to something, it's roughly the equivalent of the size of Delaware, okay? And it's disappearing, it's disappeared, okay? A lot of people can't relate to that. It's all along our coast. It's happening out there. We have over 2 million people living on, in the 20 parishes, 25 parishes across the coast. And they just don't see this. Majority of the people don't see this loss, okay? You can really get a good perspective of the loss if you're up in the air, and you can really see the degradation and how it's taking place. But if you were to take that, most people can't understand that, take that 1,900 square miles and let's bring it inland. Let's talk about that in terms of what parishes would be gone. So when you look at that, The parish of St. Charles would be gone. So would St. John the Baptist. So would St. James. And Ascension. And East Baton Rouge Parish. And East Louisiana Parish. Gone. So this much of the coast has been lost in that, span from 1930 to today. And it's gone because of the Great Flood in 1927 and what happened and transpired post 1927. You can see there, this is a sort of a depiction of the Mississippi Valley and the tributaries that run into the Mississippi and that come down to Louisiana through the Mississippi. And flooding in 1927 took place all the way up into Canada. But that red area signifies and represents the area of greatest flood. Well, the federal government said we had enough of this. No more flooding, no more misery. What are we going to do about it? And we levied off the river. That was the solution. Okay? And that's a good thing, and it's a bad thing. It's good news and bad news. Well, what's the good news? No more flooding. We fixed the problem. No more misery. What's the bad news? No more flooding as it relates to our coast. Why is that? If you look at the Mississippi and its tributaries across Louisiana before the flooding took place, you can see the veins of sediment distribution that transpired, okay, that supported the marsh and built the coast. If you consider that situation prior to the levees being implemented, about 3/4 of a square mile of land was created along our coast every year. But since 1930, we've lost 1,900 square miles. So that 3/4 of a square mile, okay, equates today, and during that time period, about another 60 square miles being added, a little over 60 square miles being added. In reverse, we've lost 1,900. And this is what it looks like today, basically. You have no distributaries. You have sediment being dumped at the end of the Mississippi, and that primarily is falling off the shelf. And you have some land being built around the Atchafalaya and around Wax Lake, but fundamentally you don't have those fingers anymore nourishing and creating the marsh. So, if we did nothing, point forward, absolutely nothing, what would be the consequences? A future without action, as we would say. In 50 years, where would we be? And we looked at, in creating the plan that we have to address the coast, we looked at 3 scenarios: a low scenario, a medium scenario, and a high scenario. That's a big surprise, right? But we took, in our models, we modeled things like increased precipitation and evaporation loss and subsidence, okay, and sea level rise and hurricane frequency and a number of hurricanes. We took all of that and we said, okay, if you don't do anything in the next 50 years, this is what you have. You see some land building at the bird's foot of the Mississippi. You still see some land building there at Wax Lake and Atchafalaya. At the end of the day, in the medium scenario, which represents, just off the top of my head, I believe about 2 foot of sea level rise. Now I won't name the other parameters because I'd have to refer to my notes. But for the low case, we'd lose another 1,200 square miles. Medium case, roughly 2,250 square miles. And in the high case, roughly 4,000 square miles of land in this 50-year period if we did nothing. So let's look at it again, 4,000 square miles. Let's go to worst case. 4,000 square miles, what does that do to us in terms of loss of parishes if we go inland and not across the coast? Well, that means that West Feliciana Parish would be gone, and Point Coupee Parish, and St. Helena Parish, and Livingston Parish, and Tangipahoa Parish, and Washington, and St. Tammany. More than 5,900 square miles of land would be gone if we did nothing. That's what's happening along our coast today, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll show you, this is a recent picture, our latest map of the coast. It's pretty reflective of where we are today. I want to give you an appreciation for how important the marsh is, okay? The ecosystem that it supports, not only that, but how important it is to us, okay? And how fragile and vulnerable we are if we don't have it. So if you look at this, and you look at, if I would say, just give me a picture of the solid land I can build a house on, I can put a foundation on, I can walk on. You take the marsh away, and this is what you have left here in southeast Louisiana. A little bit closer to home, not home, but a little bit more of an example. Look at Lake Charles, okay? And this is showing both marsh and it's showing land. If I take the marsh away, this is what I have. So the marsh is extremely, extremely important. It's the buffer that we need for storm surge, for hurricanes and bad weather. So, I looked at storm surge, I looked at marsh. What happens in a situation like this where I have a 100-year event, and after year 50, what do my flood levels look like across southeast Louisiana and southwest Louisiana? Well, this agenda shows you that. Look, the purple is over 15 feet of water. Look at the north side of Lake Pontchartrain in this area. That's 13 to 15 feet of water. All along the coast here to the west, you're looking at, 13 to 15 feet of water, and over 15 in some areas. And look at over in this area. Now, a lot of this area, you don't have a population. But again, what's important about all this is to have something there to prevent storm surge. But if we do nothing, this is a situation we believe you're going to be in. So, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that what's at stake is our livelihoods, it's our culture, it's our homes, it's our jobs. We are responding to that crisis. We built a plan, and since 2007, we've done a lot of work, like Chuck really expressed. We've secured almost $20 billion worth of monies to handle the situation. Now, a great portion of that money was spent right after Katrina. That $14.5 to $15 billion investment that we made in the HISTRA system, the Hurricane Storm Damage Risk Reduction System that you often hear about around New Orleans and St. Bernard and those areas. We've dredged or placed 120 million cubic yards. That's roughly 8.5 million truckloads of 14 cubic foot per load trucks, dump trucks. Over 36,000 acres of land benefited here, and 282 miles of levee improvements, not creations, but improvements, and then another 60 miles of barrier islands that we created after Katrina and also after the spill. So we've made some progress, some real progress. We've got a lot left to do. We're turning dirt today. We have a plan in place. We've created a plan. I want to talk about that for just a second. We created the third iteration just recently in 17. We finished the third iteration of the master plan. The first master plan was created in 2007. I was part of that plan. I oversaw the Department of Transportation. Scott Angel was looking at DNR. We came together. Our departments were on totally different wavelengths. He was responsible for restoration. Over in transportation, we were responsible for protection. And we'd often find ourselves running past each other as we'd go to DC. He was looking for money. I was going back looking for the same money, okay? And we were competing against each other. We did not have an effort that I feel was coordinated and well established. And our program was hurting. So at the end of the day, Katrina forced us to look at how we operate our business. Plus, the federal government said, look, if I'm going to spend $14.5 to $15 billion here, you're going to have to tell me and show me that you have a coordinated effort, okay, in addressing the problems of the coast. You just can't spend this money in New Orleans and say, fine, go about your business. They wouldn't let us do that. So indeed, we created the first master plan. Scott and his people focused on more or less on the legislation. We focused on actually getting a plan in place. And so we brought teams together from DNR and DOTD. We formed a team and we created the first master plan. The second master plan and the third iteration are light years better than the first. I have to say that. I think the previous administrations, Garrett Graves, and those people associated with getting us where we are today after the first master plan, I think their work was outstanding, and I'm fully appreciative, and I think the citizens of Louisiana for what they've done. They built the plan. They built it, however, with no money. Now we're in a position to have money, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, and taking that plan forward. But in the third iteration of the master plan, we went out and solicited projects from the public as well as the stakeholders and ourselves, and we said, okay, what is it can we do? What is it should we do relative to making our coast more safe and restoring it? And so the response we got was 209 projects. Okay, and I want to talk about those for a second. 135 of those 209 projects were restoration type projects. Marsh creation, to bank stabilization, to ridge restoration, et cetera, et cetera. You can see on this map, and you can see the green areas where those 135 projects, submittals and suggestions, what kind of effect they would have. We also had 54 non-structural risk reduction type projects. Those are highlighted by the areas there, which in our case, Chuck, I think I'm missing this, has to do with floodproofing non-residential or business areas, either levying those off or putting a protective levee or some sort of structure before those businesses, or elevation type projects, raising homes, etc., or voluntary, and I'll put an emphasis on voluntary acquisition. We're not in the business, nor do we want to be forcing people out of their homes. If you see a situation, if we rationalize a situation where we believe that it would be advantageous for you to move, then you do it on a voluntary basis. It's not something that we are making mandatory, nor thinking about making it mandatory. But anyway, there were 54 non-structural type risk reduction projects. And then there were 20 structural type protection projects. And that's basically levees, okay? And floodgates and so forth and so on. When you add these up, it's a total of 209 projects that were rationalized. Those 209 projects, if we were to do them all, represent about $150 billion investment. Well, obviously we can't do them all, so you have to come up with and rationalize a priority system on how you select those projects. So the master plan represents a 50-year look and a $50 billion plan. We felt like 50 years was about as far out as we could look into the future, and we felt like $50 billion was an amount we believe we could attain. How are we going to get it? We don't know. I mean, I can sit up here and tell you I don't have the answers to how we're going to come up with $50 billion. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about our money, but honestly, we don't have $50 billion. We just have to come up with it. But we selected projects of those 209 projects. We selected those based on how they would reduce flood risk and how effective they are at building and maintaining land. We use those as the primary selection criteria for our priorities. In order to do that, and build a plan and update this last iteration of the master plan, I mean, we performed a level of engagement that has not been seen before, particularly in the first two efforts to build a master plan. But when you look at efforts across state government, not too many efforts. In fact, I can't think of any that was this aggressive in bringing in others to help solve and rationalize a problem. You can see the many community conversations we had, the presentations that were made, the stakeholders we looked at, how the public responded. I mean, it was an effort that I think was exemplary of the approach that we took in getting public input into the system, into the plan. So at the end of the day, using those two criteria for selection of our projects, we came up with 124 projects that we felt brought the most value and had the most impact to what we were trying to achieve. $150 billion in flood damages would be realized through this plan, and we'd add 802 square miles of land over this 50-year period and support countless other square miles of marsh protection. So this is where the money would be spent if we had the $50 billion. $25 billion for restoration, another $25 billion for risk reduction. Restoration, you can see the greater portion of that is in marsh creation, and that's your dredging, okay? Notice that sediment diversions represent $5 billion of that $25 billion split. You hear a lot of conversations about diversions, how expensive these projects are, you know, and there's pros and cons to them. But I'm here to tell you that dredging takes up a great portion, majority of our restoration effort. And then risk reduction, a good portion of that has to do with levees and building levees and so forth. When you look at what the plan delivers, this is a map that shows if I implement the total plan, how are these flood areas and flood risks, how is that reduced? And you can see that and just as an example, because I pointed to it before, the North Shore, in this area, we're reducing that from, you know, the 15-foot levels to anywhere from 6 to 3 feet, okay? So there's a pretty good reduction. There's a significant reduction in flood levels by the introduction of this system in that area. So the next big question is, how do we fund this thing? $50 billion program. I'm going to give you an overview of our money, okay? State mineral, and I'll give this overview over a 15-year span. State mineral revenues, roughly $25 million a year. This is all the money that the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority receives from the state. That's it. Mineral revenues monies, and it's averaged over time prior to 16 and 17. It's averaged about 25 to 30 to $35 million a year. This last 2 years, we're looking at a $15 million level. You just don't have oil and gas production, right? Mineral revenues are down, given the state of the oil business. So that's all of the money we receive from the state, no general fund money. GOMESA, Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, $2.1 billion. That's roughly $140 million a year to the CPRA, roughly $36 million a year to the parishes. If you take that $140 million a year, which is the most we can get, it's the maximum amount of money we can get from this act, you extend that to the 50 years and it adds a significant more amount of money, and I'll explain that in a second. The next 4 or 5 line items here are BP related monies. Natural Resources Damages Act, our NRDA, $5 billion. Restore, pots 1, 2, and 3. You can see what the splits are there. This is a 15-year terms again on this money. And then National Fish and Wildlife Federation monies, $1.2 billion. The NRDA monies has to be spent solely on restoration. $4 billion of the $5 billion can only be spent on restoration type projects. $1 billion of the $5 billion can be spent on things like birds and turtles and those things that were affected by the spill. What happened, Chuck? There it is. The $260 million from Restore Pot 1 was the CPRA's lump sum monies that we got from that pot. Another X million dollars, I forget the amount off the top of my head, but I believe it was somewhere around $80 million went directly to the parishes. Pot 2, $52 million, not a very big pot. However, in Pot 2, there's $1.6 billion of monies at play, and this is a pot where the 5 states that were affected by the spill have to compete for that money. Okay, and so we're in a constant, I'm not going to say battle, but constant negotiations with the Restore Council on how this money should be spent, and we have to really be on top of our toes to make sure that we get a representative amount of the $1.6 billion. I would really be happy if we could take home about half of that money, about $800 million. $551 million from Pot 3. That's over 15 years. National Fish and Wildlife Foundation money, basically $1.3 billion. That money can only be spent on diversions and barrier islands. That's the restriction there. And then the other monies that you hear of that came from the BP spill is $1 billion in economic damages money that goes directly to the state that's not used for coastal monies or for coastal restoration or protection. We've already received $200 million of that $1 billion. It's an early payment, so to speak. We got that in 2016. 17 and 18, we get no money there, and the state's going to start getting $53 million a year until 2032. So the rest of that economic damages money. And then you have CPRA, Coastal Wetlands Protection and Planning and Protection Restoration Act, the BRO Act, instituted in 1992, almost $1.2 billion in this 15-year span. This program is a tremendous program. It's really sort of laid the foundation for what we do and where we are. A lot of projects have been generated there, and the state's portion, they pretty much put in around 75 to 80 million a year, and the state's portion of that is 15%. So it's a great program for us. Something I would hope keeps going. So with our funding challenges, let me talk about that for a minute. Said we needed a $50 billion program. When you add up 10.7 and you add that you just saw, and you add up, if I take the GOMESA monies and the CPRA monies and the state mineral revenue monies, and I extend those 50 years, and I add that together, I come up with about 18 to 19 billion dollars that I feel comfortable. I think we can get, if my assumptions hold true on GOMESA monies being consistent and getting the full amount year after year after year, and CPRA money being the same, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that leaves me $32 billion short. So I have a funding gap. And so what efforts do we have in place? The challenge that we have is, how do we find that money? What are some of the creative and innovative things we can do to bring more money to the table? And so we're working hard there. My revenue is gonna be gone in 2032. BP monies stop coming in. So that's a challenge. What am I going to do after that if I don't find other monies? Risk payback, hurricane storm damage, a risk reduction system. Okay? The 14.5 to $15 billion that we invested in, that the government invested in New Orleans after Katrina, portion of that, our cost share we've got to pay for, and that's $3 billion. Starting in 2019 or 2020, when they officially turned the system over to us, we're obligated and on the hook for $100 million a year. That's going to throw a tremendous hole in our program. So we got to figure out how we take care of that. Right now, I'm asking the government to just forgive it. Can you forgive that? Okay? And then leverage existing assets and leverage existing revenues. We need to get every bit of leverage and every bit of value out of the monies that we have today. How do we do that? It's a big challenge for us. Implementation challenges, permits. You've all heard of the problems we have in getting permits. From the Corps, from NOAA, from EPA, it's very difficult. And ladies and gentlemen, we don't have any more time. We talk about all this to this point in time. We don't have any more time to do these projects. We're out of time. And so the level of urgency that we need to get our projects implemented is simply on another level. And so to fight the bureaucracy and to get permits is a big challenge for us. We're dealing with multiple federal agencies, again, like EPA and NOAA and RCS and those. So it's very difficult for us. And then we have laws in place designed to protect the environment, okay? To evaluate environmental restoration projects, to protect the environment. We'll try and so when you want to try to do something in an area, they're gonna look at those laws, which we want to restore, yet we are hampered by laws and regulations that want to protect. And so it really, for no better choice of word, crimps our style and crimps the opportunity to improve the environment and to improve the situation we're in. But you know, there's reason for optimism. We've got science to a point now, and this whole master plan is I'm proud to say, because I don't think I'd have it any other way. At least I wouldn't want to be affiliated with it if it was any other way. It's based on science. Okay, it's not based on someone's political will, whatever. It's based on science, and we're getting to a point where we have a mature science, and we understand the very dynamics of our coast, and we've got the expertise needed to take and make decisive actions. We've got, you heard Chuck say, we've got project results that are very encouraging. We're seeing projects really perform better than we thought they would. We have game-changing projects that are in engineering and development right now. We have 5 projects really that represent about $3 billion worth of work that we're ready to go. We're trying to get the Trump administration to recognize those and speed up the permitting process. You have the Mid-Barataria diversion, the Mid-Breton diversion. You have the Calcasieu Salinity Control Project, the Houma Navigational Lock, and the reintroduction of the Mississippi into the Marlborough Swamp. All those are 5 major projects that, again, we've got in front of the administration to try to help us get over the permitting hurdles. And then today, ladies and gentlemen, today, I'm optimistic because we have money right now. In the next 15 years, we've got a program that we can really work through. What's going to happen after those 15 years if I don't get another $32 billion is going to be the key. And then, you know, last and by all means not least, this is a bipartisan effort. And that's demonstrated by the fact that in '07 and in '12 and in '17, the master plan was voted on unanimously by the legislature. And today, you have a coastal governor, someone who really cares about the coast, who's intimately involved in it, and spends a lot of time understanding and asking me questions and wanting to know the details and supporting it along the way, preventing challenges to the monies that we have. So I think that's it says a lot for where he stands, and it says a lot for the program, and it helps us really carry the program through a little quicker. Having said that, I think that's probably over my time, but that's the comments I have, and I am more than happy to entertain some questions. What we're looking for from the new administration is not necessarily funding. We have the money to do some major projects we want to do now. It's support from that administration to help speed up and accelerate the permitting process and the process we go about in getting a project improved and implemented. And so we're looking to them to help us streamline that process and optimize it so that we can get projects on the ground and implemented a lot quicker.
You mentioned there are some reasons for optimism when it comes to Louisiana's coast.
There is. I mean, first and foremost is we have a plan, and that plan is science-based, and it's recognized across the state, across the region, across the U.S., across the coast, and and internationally. It's recognized as a first-class, top-notch, unprecedented plan. So I'm optimistic about that. I'm optimistic about the fact that we've got an unprecedented amount of money that we have to work with now, given the BP. I mean, it's not the way you want to get money, but we have it, and so for the next 15 years, I'm optimistic about the fact that we can do things and we can accomplish things because we have money to do that.
If people have questions like more information, what should they do?
They should go to our website, and you can find about anything you want to find out about the coast, where you live, in fact, and how that relates to what you might be exposed to relative to storms and so forth. So. And flooding depths. So you can get about anything you want to get from our website.